Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Have you ever been the silent one in a room full of loud, arrogant people only to realize your silence was the very weapon they should have feared the most? This story is for anyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, and treated as a mere stepping stone by the people who were supposed to protect them. Please remember that all names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am 34 years old and I am a federal forensic auditor. For those outside the financial sector, that means I am the ghost in the machine. I track down the money that people bleed dry from corporations, the hidden offshore accounts that greedy executives think they have buried, and the invisible paper trails of immense wealth. I dissect financial empires for a living. I see the absolute worst of human greed laid bare in spreadsheets and encrypted ledgers. I have brought down pharmaceutical billionaires and frozen the assets of corrupt politicians without ever raising my voice above a polite, conversational murmur. My entire career is built on the premise that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide, while the quietest person is the one holding the guillotine string. And yet, despite my professional pedigree to my own family, I was nothing more than the forgettable, convenient scapegoat. I was the silent sister, the dutiful daughter, who never asked for anything, who never made a fuss, and who could always be relied upon to fade into the background when the spotlight was required for someone else. At 34, I had quietly amassed a personal net worth that bordered on the surreal. Through strategic investments, a minority stake in a crisis management firm, and a series of exceptionally lucrative whistleblower bounties from federal financial fraud cases, I had built a shadow empire. My portfolio included a $600 million real estate trust encompassing prime commercial properties in Manhattan, a vineyard in Tuscany, and a sprawling historical 12-bedroom coastal compound in Newport, Rhode Island, known as the Ashford Estate. I did not flaunt this wealth. I drove a modest unbranded hybrid sedan. I lived in a minimalist, high-security penthouse in the city that I leased under a corporate LLC. I wore tailored suits in muted tones of charcoal and navy, impeccably crafted, but intentionally designed not to draw the eye. I preferred the quiet luxury of anonymity. In my line of work, visibility is a vulnerability. My family, however, worshipped at the altar of perception. My mother, Beatrice, was a woman who measured a person's worth entirely by the brand of their handbag and the exclusivity of their zip code. She possessed a terrifying microscopic ability to locate a person's insecurity and press her thumb firmly against it. My older brother Julian was her undisputed golden child. Julian was a man composed entirely of loud laughter, borrowed confidence, and failed tech startup. He was charismatic, handsome, and functionally incompetent. He bled money, usually other people's money, with the reckless abandon of a man who firmly believed the universe owed him a soft landing. 4 years ago, Julian's third revolutionary app had collapsed, leaving him drowning in debt and facing a rather ugly foreclosure on his suburban home. His wife, Chloe, a woman whose personality was entirely constructed around her Instagram aesthetic and her proximity to wealth, was threatening to leave him. My mother called me, weeping theatrically, demanding that I do something to save the family name. So I did what the quiet, dutiful daughter was conditioned to do. I did not write them a check. I knew better than to hand Julian liquid cash. Instead, I opened the doors to the Ashford Estate. I had purchased the Newport compound 3 years prior through a blind trust. It was a masterpiece of Gilded Age architecture, sitting on 20 acres of pristine, manicured coastline, boasting a private deepwater dock, a carriage house, and gardens that required a staff of 6 to maintain. I told my family that a client of mine was going overseas for a few years and had offered the estate to me as a caretaker. I told them Julian and Chloe could stay there rent-free to get back on their feet. I framed it as a temporary favor, a quiet sanctuary where Julian could restructure his life without the crushing weight of a mortgage. I never told them I owned it. I never corrected their assumption that I was merely a mid-level accountant pulling a favor from a wealthy patron. I paid the exorbitant property taxes, nearly $200,000 annually. I paid the insurance. I paid the landscaping and maintenance crews through an anonymous shell corporation. I gave them the keys to a kingdom they could never afford, and I asked for absolutely nothing in return. I thought I was being a good sister. I thought I was providing a safety net, but I was about to learn a very cold, very expensive lesson about the nature of toxic entitlement. When you give a greedy person a sanctuary, they do not see a gift, they see a conquest, and when you remain silent about your boundaries, they do not assume you are generous. They assume you are weak. Over the next 4 years, the Ashford Estate ceased to be a temporary refuge. In Julian and Chloe's minds, through a twisted psychological alchemy, the estate slowly mutated into their rightful property. They began hosting lavish summer parties, passing the compound off as the fruit of Julian's consulting successes. They redecorated the guest wings without asking. They parked their least luxury SUVs in the circular driveway as if they held the deed. And I, visiting only occasionally for required holiday dinners, allowed the illusion to persist. I sat at the edge of the grand mahogany dining table, eating food prepared in my kitchen, looking out over the ocean from my property, while Julian loudly accepted compliments on his magnificent home. I smiled politely. I stayed quiet. I let them play their games because it was easier than enduring my mother's shrill lectures about how I was always trying to undermine Julian's confidence. That silence was a choice. It was a shield I had carried since childhood to deflect their chaos. But a shield can easily become a cage if you hold it too long. I did not realize that while I was quietly observing their delusions, they were actively plotting to make those delusions permanent. They had looked at my silence and mistaken it for a profound exploitable stupidity. They thought I was a pawn they could simply sweep off the board. They were wrong, so mathematically, disastrously wrong. The mechanism of their destruction did not begin with a shout or a dramatic confrontation. It began, as all modern betrayals do, with the silent buzz of a smartphone screen, delivering a message that would finally snap the delicate, frayed leash of my patience. The message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my Geneva office reviewing a highly classified cache of offshore banking records related to a federal indictment, when my phone vibrated against the polished mahogany desk. The screen lit up with a notification from the Vance family official group chat. There were 41 members in this chat, a sprawling network of aunts, cousins, in-laws, and my immediate family. I rarely participated, preferring to exist as a passive observer to their endless streams of vacation photos and passive-aggressive comments. The message was from Julian. There was no greeting, there was no polite preamble. Mom and I decided, we're hosting the Vanguard Charity Gala at Ashford next Saturday for 200 people. We already told the governor we're hosting. We booked Sterling & Co. for the catering and event management. Evelyn, you need to drive down on Friday to handle the vendor coordination and prep the guest wings. We told the committee you're acting as our on-site coordinator. Be here by 8 a.m. sharp. 11 seconds. Chloe sent a follow-up message, a champagne glass emoji followed by, so excited. Evelyn, make sure you wear something appropriate. We have a photographer from Vogue Society coming. Then came my mother, Beatrice. Evelyn is always so helpful behind the scenes. She loves doing the little tasks, best little helper in the family. I thought about the past 4 years. I thought about the holidays where I was banished to the kitchen to fetch wine while Julian held court in the drawing room, swirling a glass of my vintage Bordeaux, telling exaggerated stories of his business acumen. I thought about the times Beatrice had loudly commented on my drab clothing in front of Chloe's country club friends, lamenting that I simply didn't have Julian's flair for success. For years I had categorized these moments as mere annoyances, the unavoidable tax one pays for having a toxic family. I had called my silence patience. I had called it taking the high road but sitting in the sterile, hyper-secure environment of my office. A line I had read in a psychological profiling manual surfaced in my mind. Other people's grandiosity is not your obligation to sustain. I had lived my entire adult life acting as the shock absorber for my family's delusions. I wasn't exhausted because of my high-stakes career. I was exhausted because I was functionally acting as the load-bearing wall for a family built entirely on lies. The flatness of Julian's text, "We already told the governor," struck a different chord. This wasn't a careless assumption, this was a deliberate circumvention. It was a decision that actively erased me from the narrative of my own property. Why announce a massive charity gala to a chat of 41 people before securing the explicit permission of the person whose labor you are demanding? Because they wanted me cornered. They wanted the social pressure of 41 witnesses to ensure my compliance. They knew that a quiet, dutiful woman hates causing a scene. I rested my fingertips on the glass screen of my phone. A strange glacial calm washed over me. It was a sensation entirely devoid of anger. It felt like the precise moment a complex algebraic equation finally balances perfectly in your mind. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I typed my response with deliberate, measured keystrokes. Then you will need to coordinate with the vendors yourselves. I am in Geneva on federal business until the end of the month. I hit send. I did not include an emoji. I did not apologize. I simply stated a geographic and professional reality. I placed the phone face down on the desk, picked up my encrypted secure phone, and went back to analyzing the offshore accounts of a Russian oligarch. The family group chat went dead silent for a full hour, not a single message materialized. In my family, that specific brand of digital silence is never peaceful. It is the tactical silence that occurs when the main conversation has fractured into a dozen furious, private side chats where the true venom is being deployed. My phone rang 2 hours later. It was my mother. I let it ring 4 times before answering, putting it on speakerphone while I highlighted a discrepancy in a Cayman Islands ledger. Evelyn, Beatrice's voice came through, dripping with that particular maternal warmth that always disguised a blade. Sweetheart, please tell me you're joking. Don't make this hard on Julian. I am not making anything hard. Mother, I replied, my voice perfectly level. I am in Switzerland. I cannot coordinate a party in Rhode Island. Julian is under immense stress. Evelyn, Chloe is stressed. The committee is expecting perfection. You backing out at the last minute looks incredibly selfish. It looks erratic. I cannot back out of an event I was never invited to plan, I stated, the cold logic of the sentence hanging in the air. Beatrice sighed. It was a long theatrical exhalation designed to convey profound disappointment. People are starting to worry about you, Evelyn. My hands stopped moving over the keyboard. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Worry about me how? You've been so distant lately, forgetful, locking yourself away in that little city apartment. Working those long, strange hours for that government job of yours. A pause heavy with implication. Julian mentioned you seemed quite confused during Christmas. Honestly, it's a lot of pressure for one fragile woman to handle. We're just concerned about your mental state. I set my pen down very, very carefully. Forgetful, confused, fragile, she wielded those words as if she had rehearsed them. They possessed a polished, rhythmic quality, like dialogue from a script that had already been written, edited, and approved. Fuzz, I said, my tone eerily gentle. How do you know the guest list is 200 people? Julian only announced it in the chat 2 hours ago. The line went dead silent. The hesitation lasted precisely 1 heartbeat too long. Julian told me earlier this week, she said, her cadence rushing slightly. Obviously, we talk, we coordinate. Of course you do, I murmured. We ended the call shortly after. I remained seated in the quiet hum of my office, the pristine Swiss skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The words echoed in the silence, confused, fragile mental state. I was going to need more than patience. I was going to need leverage. The true shape of their conspiracy arrived the very next morning, and it was delivered with the staggering incompetence that only true arrogance can produce. At 9:17 a.m. Geneva time, my personal phone buzzed. It was a message in the large 41-member family group chat. It was from Chloe. I suspect her manicured thumbs were moving far faster than her cognitive processing speed. Okay team, here's the final rundown for Saturday. After the governor's toast before the main course is served, Beatrice will open the conversation gently. Express deep concern for Evelyn's recent mental state. Then Julian brings out the medical proxy and the quitclaim deed. Keep it loving, keep it sad. She's getting so confused lately anyway, so the narrative won't be hard to sell to the committee. We are only doing this to protect the family estate from being lost due to her decline. Julian has the transfer papers ready. Don't let her get cornered into saying no in front of the high-profile guests. She hates scenes. She will sign it just to avoid embarrassing herself in front of the governor. I read it once. I did not blink. I read it a second time, slower, absorbing the sheer sociopathic clinicality of the prose. 41 people, every aunt, every cousin, every distant in-law had just received a front-row ticket to my planned execution. For about 90 seconds the message hung there, naked and radioactive in the digital space. Then came a frantic follow-up from Chloe. Wait, wrong chat. Nor that, deleting. The message vanished from the server, pulled back into the ether. But it did not vanish from my device the moment I had read the words quitclaim deed. My professional instincts had overridden my familial shock. I had pressed the 2 physical buttons on my phone to capture a screenshot. Twice, the digital evidence was already secured, locked behind military-grade encryption on a secure server before Chloe had even realized her catastrophic error. I sat very still in the high-backed leather chair of my office. The Swiss morning light cast long, sharp shadows across my desk. They were not merely trying to secure free labor for a charity gala. They were orchestrating a theatrical, highly public ambush to steal my property. She's getting so confused lately anyway, so the narrative won't be hard to sell. Those words were the most chilling part of the entire debacle. It wasn't the greed that disgusted me. Greed is predictable. It was the casual clerical cruelty of being scheduled for mental erasure penciled in between the governor's toast and the main course like a trivial catering detail. I did not weep, I did not call Julian and scream down the line in a fit of hysterical rage. If you have ever been the quiet one in a family of narcissists, you understand that explosions are exactly what they want. An explosion validates their narrative that you are unstable. Instead, I engaged the one mechanism they had severely underestimated: my professional expertise. It took less than 12 minutes for the architecture of his desperation to reveal itself. Julian was not just broke, he was criminally leveraged. Over the past 18 months, he had taken out 3 massive high-interest loans from a shadow banking syndicate operating out of the Caymans. And the collateral he had listed for these millions of dollars in illegal off-the-books loans. The Ashford estate. I stared at the glowing lines of code and financial transfers on my monitors. The puzzle pieces interlocked with a satisfying, deadly precision. My brother was a cornered rat trying to chew his way through my life to save his own. He had built a trap, perfectly designed and meticulously rehearsed. He just didn't realize that I was the one holding the keys to the room he had locked himself inside. I minimized the federal database and opened a new encrypted channel. It was time to make my first move. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It belonged to Marcus Vance, no relation. Simply a serendipitous surname, a former federal prosecutor who was now the most feared, high-priced property and trust litigator in Manhattan. He was a man who spoke softly and carried a legal sledgehammer. Evelyn, Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice a low rumble. I assume you aren't calling to discuss the weather in Geneva. Marcus, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I need you to draft a document for me. And I need it executed with maximum prejudice. Tell me everything, he said, the sound of a pen clicking open echoing over the line. I told him everything. I recounted the text message, the 4 years of rent-free occupation, the forged collateral documents I had just uncovered, and the leaked screenshot detailing the public ambush at the Vanguard Gala. I read Chloe's text to him word for word. Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his tone was laced with a dark, predatory amusement. They plan to declare you mentally unfit and force a quitclaim deed in front of the governor. Evelyn, the sheer staggering idiocy of that strategy is almost commendable. They rely on my silence, I explained. They assume I will fold under social pressure to maintain decorum. And what exactly do you want to do to them? Marcus asked. I want to end them, I said quietly. Financially, legally, and publicly, they are currently tenants at will. Correct? No written lease, no fixed term, no rent paid, Marcus confirmed. In that state, they are tenants at will. You can terminate that arrangement with a 30-day notice to quit. We can serve them quietly through a courier today. You don't even have to attend this absurd gala. No, I said, the word dropping like a stone into a still pond. They want an audience, Marcus. They specifically designed this play for 200 elite witnesses. They wanted me cornered and small in a room full of the state's most powerful people. So, the truth will come out in that exact same room. Calmly, without a single raised voice, Marcus chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. You're going to walk straight into your own execution. I am going to keep my word, I said. I am going to attend the gala. I am just going to bring the right paperwork. I will have the 30-day notice drafted, sealed and notarized by tomorrow morning, Marcus promised. Furthermore, I will initiate a full lockdown on the Ashford Trust. No assets can be transferred, leveraged or sold without a dual signature authorization from both you and a federal judge. By the time they present that quitclaim deed, it will be legally worthless paper. And Marcus? I added, glancing back at the federal database displaying Julian's fraudulent Cayman loans. I need you to forward a heavily redacted summary of Julian's recent collateral pledges to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Let's make sure the federal authorities are fully aware of his creative accounting. Consider it done, Marcus said. I hung up the phone. The board was set, but I had one more call to make. A call that would secure the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle. I needed to ensure that Julian's public humiliation was executed not by me but by the very machine he thought he had hired to elevate himself. I dialed a private unlisted number that routed directly to the executive office of Sterling & Co., the premier luxury event management firm operating on the eastern seaboard. They were the firm you called when you wanted to impress a head of state or host a 9-figure charity gala. They were known for their draconian contracts, their flawless execution, and their absolute discretion. Victoria, I said when she answered secure line. I assume you have a file on your desk for the Vanguard Charity Gala scheduled for this Saturday in Newport. Evelyn, Victoria's voice was crisp and professional. Yes, the file is right here, 200 covers, white glove service, full orchestral quartet. It's a massive undertaking on short notice, but the client Julian Vance insisted on expediting the booking. A brief calculated pause. I noted the surname. I assume this is not a coincidence. It is not. I confirmed. I need an operational update on that specific booking. Victoria sighed, the sound of a woman who had dealt with too many arrogant clients. Mr. Vance has been difficult. He is demanding, aggressive with my staff, and possesses a remarkable lack of understanding regarding logistical realities. He keeps referring to the property, the Ashford estate, as his personal compound. However, we encountered a significant administrative roadblock yesterday. I leaned forward, the icy calm solidifying in my chest. Go on. Standard operating procedure for an event of this magnitude, especially one involving high liability factors like temporary structures, alcohol service to government officials, and a full catering staff, requires a comprehensive damage liability release, Victoria explained. The contract strictly mandates that the release must be signed by the legal owner of record for the property. Not a tenant, not a guest, and certainly not a man who merely claims to own it. When my legal department ran the property records for the Ashford estate to draft the liability waiver, the deed did not return Julian Vance's name. It returned mine, I said quietly. Exactly, Victoria said, when my director of operations informed Miss Vance of this discrepancy and requested the legal owner's signature for the $150,000 liability deposit, he became irate. He claimed the county records were outdated and that his elderly, confused mother or mentally unstable sister hadn't updated the paperwork. A cold, precise anger flared behind my ribs, sharp and clean. Mentally unstable sister, he was already testing the narrative on strangers. He demanded we bypass protocol. Victoria continued. He threatened to ruin our reputation with the governor if we didn't just accept his signature on the release. I put a hold on the file and was preparing to contact you for authorization to terminate the contract. There it was, the proof of Victoria's competence and loyalty. She could have simply taken the massive exorbitant fee and processed the paperwork, but she protected my property when I wasn't even in the room. Do not terminate the contract, Victoria, I said, my voice dropping to a register that conveyed absolute, unyielding authority. I want you to proceed with the event exactly as planned. Execute it flawlessly, serve the beluga caviar, pour the vintage champagne, and ensure the orchestral quartet plays perfectly. Victoria remained silent for a moment, processing the command. And the liability release, the $150,000 deposit. That is where we deviate from standard protocol, I said, a slow, predatory smile forming. I will be attending the gala on Saturday. I do not want the release signed beforehand. I want you to personally oversee this event, Victoria. You will be on site during the dinner right after the main course is cleared. I want you to approach the head table with the liability release on your clipboard. I want you to read the requirement out loud to the entire room and demand the signature of the sole legal owner of record. The silence on the line stretched out, filled only by the faint hum of international static. Then a low, appreciative chuckle came from Victoria. She understood the architecture of the trap instantly. No special favors, I continued. No theatrics on your part, just the cold, ironclad application of your firm's standard legal procedure. Executed publicly. Procedure, Victoria, is the most ruthless weapon in the world when applied to arrogant people. You taught me that, Victoria murmured, her voice laced with deep satisfaction. It will be a pleasure, Evelyn. We will set the stage perfectly. When I demand the owner's signature, there won't be a shadow for him to hide in. Thank you, Victoria. I will see you on Saturday. I terminated the call. The pieces were no longer just moving into place. They were locked. The jaws of the trap were bolted to the floor. The bait was set, and my brother was happily marching straight toward the pressure plate, carrying his own execution warrant in his pocket. I flew back to the States on a red-eye flight Thursday night. My driver picked me up at JFK and drove me straight to my Manhattan penthouse. I slept for exactly 6 hours, woke up, drank a single cup of black coffee, and waited for the courier from Marcus's law firm. At 9 a.m., the heavy oak door of my penthouse chimed. I opened it to find a courier holding a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. I signed for it, took it to my kitchen island, and sliced it open with a letter opener. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a freshly notarized, county-stamped copy of the original deed to the Ashford estate. One name on the grantee line, Evelyn Vance. The second was the 30-day notice to quit. It was printed on the heavy watermarked stationery of Marcus's elite law firm. It outlined in brutal legal clarity the immediate termination of Julian and Chloe's tenancy at will. The third document was the federal lockdown order on the Ashford Trust, signed by a federal judge, rendering any future quitclaim deed or transfer of property entirely null and void without my physical presence in a federal courtroom. I folded the documents carefully and slipped them into the inner pocket of my tailored evening clutch. They weighed almost nothing, yet they possessed the kinetic energy of a nuclear warhead. I ran my thumb over the smooth leather of the clutch, feeling the precise, undeniable reality of my leverage. I was not going to a charity gala, I was going to a controlled demolition. The drive from Manhattan to Newport takes approximately 3.5 hours if the traffic on I-95 is merciful. I spent the time in the back of a luxury town car, watching the coastal landscape shift from urban grit to the manicured, moneyed serenity of Rhode Island. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray, threatening rain-fitting weather for a reckoning. As the town car turned onto Ocean Drive and approached the massive wrought iron gates of the Ashford estate, I felt a familiar cold stillness settle over me. The gates swung open, revealing the sweeping circular driveway lined with centuries-old oak trees. The mansion itself was a monolithic structure of pale stone and dark slate, a monument to gilded age excess. I stepped out of the town car just as Julian emerged from the main portico. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo that I suspected he had charged to one of his fraudulent credit lines. He looked manic, his eyes darting across the lawn, barking conflicting orders at a pair of florists who were trying to ignore him. When he saw me, his entire demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. The frantic arrogance evaporated, replaced instantly by a cloying, performative gentleness. He rushed down the stone steps, his arms outstretched. "Evelyn, you made it," he exclaimed, pulling me into a suffocating hug. He patted my back with slow, exaggerated thumps, the way one might comfort a traumatized child or a skittish animal. "We were so worried the drive might be too much for you. Are you feeling okay? You look a bit pale." "I am perfectly fine, Julian," I said, my voice smooth and frictionless, offering absolutely nothing for him to grasp. I stepped back, smoothing the front of my navy silk dress. "We just want you to relax today," Julian continued, speaking slightly louder than necessary, ensuring that the Sterling & Co. staff nearby could hear him. "You don't need to worry about any of the event details. I know how easily overwhelmed you get. Just go inside, rest in one of the guest rooms, and let me handle the heavy lifting. This is my house, my event, and I've got it all under control." My house, the words hung in the salt-heavy air. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the desperate hollow core beneath the tuxedo. He believed his own lie. He had repeated it so many times to friends and to himself, that the illusion had calcified into a rigid delusion. "I appreciate your concern," I said, offering a small inscrutable smile. "I will go inside and find Mother." My mother, Beatrice, was holding court in the drawing room, sipping a mimosa and surrounded by a gaggle of Chloe's wealthy, vacuous friends. When she spotted me, she immediately adopted the same tragic, martyred expression Julian had worn. "Evelyn, darling," Beatrice cooed, sweeping across the room. She embraced me, leaning in to whisper sharply in my ear, "Try to smile, Evelyn. The governor arrives in an hour and we need to present a united, stable front." She pulled back and addressed the room of women, her voice projecting a theatrical sorrow. "My poor Evelyn has been working herself into such a state lately. We are just so relieved to have her here, safe and sound in the family home, where we can keep a close eye on her." The women murmured sympathetically, offering me patronizing smiles and tilted heads. I was the tragic, fragile spinster sister, the cautionary tale of a woman who chose a demanding career over a husband, resulting in a fractured mind. They were actively constructing my straitjacket, thread by thread, in front of an audience. I did not flinch. I did not attempt to correct the narrative. A forensic auditor knows that you never interrupt a suspect while they are eagerly providing you with the rope to hang them. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my tone perfectly modulated, devoid of sarcasm or defensive heat. "It is certainly comforting to be surrounded by family." I moved through the estate like a ghost in my own house. I observed the Sterling & Co. staff moving with military precision. I saw the raw bar being assembled on the terrace, the ice sculptures gleaming under the overcast sky. I noted the placement of the string quartet near the grand staircase. At 6 p.m. the guests began to arrive. It was a parade of Rhode Island's political and financial elite. Mayors, state senators, hedge fund managers, and local celebrities flowed into the Ashford estate, their designer gowns and tailored suits rustling in the elegant space. I positioned myself near the back of the grand ballroom, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched Julian work the room. He was in his element, shaking hands, clapping back, loudly accepting praise for the magnificent restoration of the estate's historical crown molding. He was selling the illusion with the frantic energy of a man who knows the bill is due at midnight. Chloe was by his side too loudly, pointing out the architectural details as if she had personally commissioned them. They were intoxicated by the proximity to power, they were drunk on the stolen prestige. At 7:30 p.m. the chimes rang, signaling the transition to the formal seated dinner in the massive marquee tent. 200 guests began to take their seats at tables adorned with towering crystal centerpieces and heavy silver cutlery. I found my assigned seat. It was, unsurprisingly, placed at a table near the back, far from the head table where Julian, Chloe, Beatrice and the governor were seated. It was a strategic placement. I was close enough to be monitored, but far enough away that I could not easily address the primary audience when the ambush occurred. I sat down. I placed my evening clutch on my lap, resting my hand lightly over the cool leather, feeling the rigid edges of the federal lockdown order and the deed inside. The lights dimmed, a hush fell over the crowd as the governor stood up to deliver the opening remarks. The trap was finally springing shut, but they had no idea who was truly inside the cage. The governor's speech was brief, polished, and entirely unremarkable. He thanked Julian and Chloe for opening their magnificent historical home to the Vanguard Charity Foundation, commending their profound commitment to philanthropy. Julian absorbed the praise with a practiced humility that made my stomach turn. He nodded solemnly, placing a hand over his heart, acting the part of the reluctant noble benefactor. As the applause faded and the guests began to adjust their napkins in anticipation of the first course, Julian did not sit down. Instead, he reached for a silver knife and gently tapped it against the rim of his crystal water goblet. The clear, sharp ringing sound cut through the ambient chatter. 200 faces turned toward the head table. "If I may," Julian began, his voice amplified by the discreet lapel microphone he wore. He projected a tone of deep, gravelly sincerity. "Before we begin this incredible meal, I want to take a brief moment to address something deeply personal. Something regarding family." The room quieted in that specific, expectant way that occurs when high society senses a performance of vulnerability. Beatrice sat to his left, her hands clasped tightly under her chin, her face a mask of tragic concern. Chloe was already dabbing at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. It was perfectly choreographed. "We are all here tonight to celebrate community and support," Julian continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "But charity must always begin at home. Many of you know my sister Evelyn." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the marquee. 200 pairs of eyes shifted in my direction. I sat perfectly still, my posture impeccably straight, my hands folded neatly on my lap. I did not shrink from the collective gaze. I simply looked back at Julian, my expression utterly unreadable. "Evelyn has always been the quiet strength of our family," Beatrice chimed in, projecting her voice with theatrical grief. She stood up slowly, leaning against the table for dramatic effect. "But recently, that strength has faltered. As many of you know, the pressures of the modern world can be incredibly cruel to a fragile mind. Evelyn has been struggling. She has been confused, overwhelmed, and increasingly incapable of managing the heavy burdens of her life." A low murmur of sympathy rippled through the tent. I saw the mayor's wife shake her head sadly. I saw a hedge fund manager whisper something to his partner, casting a pitying glance my way. The narrative was taking root, spreading like a virus through the elite crowd. "It breaks our hearts to see her like this," Chloe added, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We have tried so hard to protect her, to keep her safe here at Ashford. But the legal and financial responsibilities of this estate are simply too much for someone in her declining mental state. She's overwhelmed. We are terrified she might make a mistake that could jeopardize everything our family has built." They were laying the foundation block by block. They were publicly establishing my incompetence to invalidate any future protest I might raise. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. They were not just stealing my property, they were recruiting 200 influential witnesses to retroactively justify the theft. "That is why tonight as a family we are taking the necessary steps to lift that terrible burden from her shoulders," Julian announced, his voice swelling with heroic resolve. He stopped at my table. He crouched low beside my chair, invading my personal space, ensuring that the Vogue Society photographer stationed nearby had a clear, unobstructed angle of his benevolent gesture. "Evelyn," Julian said, his voice dropping to a loud whisper designed to carry. He placed the blue folio on the table right next to my pristine white dinner plate. He clicked a heavy Mont Blanc pen and laid it carefully beside the document. This is a medical proxy and a quitclaim deed. It transfers the legal management of the Ashford estate directly into my and Chloe's names. You won't have to worry about the taxes, the maintenance, or the liabilities ever again. We will take care of everything. You can finally just rest. The document lay open. My name was typed cleanly on the grantor line. The space below it was empty, waiting for my signature to sever me from my $600 million asset. Just sign it, sweetheart, Beatrice called out from the head table, her voice trembling with fake tears. Let Julian carry the weight for your own good, for your peace of mind. I looked at the blue folio. I looked at the Mont Blanc pen. I want to be precise about how I felt in that moment. I did feel fear. I did not feel panic. I felt the absolute crystallized clarity of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into the final mechanism of a trap. I felt the cold, hard mathematics of forensic justice aligning perfectly. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen. I heard Chloe exhale a sharp, audible breath of relief. I saw Julian's shoulders drop slightly as the tension left his body. The photographer raised his camera, capturing the moment of my total defeat. I held the pen over the signature line for exactly 3 seconds. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, I capped the pen. I placed it back on the table. I did not sign the document. I did not touch the paper. I looked directly into Julian's eyes, the coldness in my gaze finally breaking through the polite facade. Before I sign anything regarding the Ashford estate, I said, my voice not raised but vibrating with a terrifying, absolute calm that cut through the silence of the tent like a diamond blade. I believe the event management firm requires a signature of their own. Don't they, Victoria? And from the shadows near the kitchen entrance, Victoria stepped forward. She did not walk, she glided. She was dressed in an immaculate black suit holding a silver clipboard. She crossed the Grand Marquis with the relentless, inevitable momentum of a glacier. Victoria stopped a polite professional distance from the head table, angling herself so that her voice would carry naturally across the acoustic layout of the tent. My profound apologies for the interruption to this evening's program, Governor, distinguished guests. Victoria announced, her voice a masterclass in corporate authority. However, Sterling and Company protocol mandates that prior to the commencement of service for an event of this magnitude, our comprehensive damage liability release must be executed. Julian frowned, a flicker of genuine irritation breaking through his sorrowful facade. He stood up from his crouch beside me and adjusted his cuffs. Yes, the paperwork. I told your operations director yesterday. I will sign it. Bring it here. I am afraid that is impossible, Mr. Vance, Victoria replied, her tone remaining flawlessly pleasant but utterly immovable. The contract for the Vanguard Charity Gala includes a $150,000 liability waiver, covering structural potential damage to the historical architecture, the grounds, and the maritime dock. State law and our firm's ironclad insurance policy dictates that this release must be signed in person by the legal owner of record for the property where the event is taking place. Julian's face tightened. The irritation was rapidly morphing into panic. He recognized the procedural wall he was hitting. But his arrogance prevented him from understanding the depth of the trench he was standing in. This is my residence. I am the primary beneficiary of the trust. Just give me the damn pen. You initiated the booking, Mr. Vance, Victoria agreed, her voice ringing clear as a bell across the silent marquee. However, when our legal department ran the compulsory title search on the Ashford estate to draft the liability waiver, it flagged a critical discrepancy. Your name does not appear anywhere on the county deed. The silence in the tent deepened. It ceased to be an expectant silence. It became the heavy, pressurized silence that precedes an explosion. I saw the governor lean forward slightly, his political instincts sensing the sudden shift in the wind. The records are outdated, Julian snapped, his voice rising, shedding the gentle brother persona completely. It's a clerical error at the county office. It is basically our house. My sister is confused. She hasn't managed the paperwork. Sterling and Company relies on current legally binding county records, Vance, Victoria stated, raising the clipboard, and according to the federal and state registries accessed 24 hours ago, the sole legal owner of record for the Ashford estate is Evelyn Vance. The word sole dropped into the center of the marquee like an anvil. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. The mayor's wife lowered her wineglass, her eyes wide. The hedge fund manager who had pitied me moments earlier suddenly sat up very straight, recognizing the devastating legal checkmate that had just been executed. Marlene, sitting 3 tables over, gasped audibly. Chloe's manufactured tears vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Julian's face cycled through shades of red and white. That is a lie, that is a mistake. My sister is mentally unfit to hold property. He was shouting now, the panic tearing away the last shreds of his dignity. After everything we've done for her. We took care of this place, we earned it. I opened my evening clutch. The satisfying snap of the clasp echoed loudly in the proximity of the microphone still attached to Julian's lapel. I reached inside and withdrew the documents Marcus had sent me. I did not rush, I extracted them with the slow, deliberate grace of a card dealer laying out a royal flush. I stood up, I did not need to stand to make my point, but I wanted to be at eye level with my brother when I dismantled his life. I placed the freshly notarized county-stamped deed on the white tablecloth, right next to the fraudulent quitclaim deed he had tried to force upon me. It is not a mistake, Julian, I said, my voice low, steady, and carrying an Arctic chill. And it is not outdated, it is a certified copy stamped yesterday. I turned my gaze to the room, addressing the 200 elite guests who had just been drafted as witnesses to my supposed mental decline. You told everyone you were hosting this gala, Julian, I continued, my voice amplifying perfectly in the silent space. You booked the finest firm on the East Coast, you invited the governor, you invited the financial elite of Rhode Island into my home. You simply forgot to invite the one person who actually owns it. Evelyn, stop this, Beatrice shrieked from the head table, abandoning all pretense of maternal concern. She looked feral, her perfectly coiffed hair suddenly appearing disheveled. How can you do this to us, in front of everyone? We are your family, we took you in when you had nothing. You took me in, I asked, a genuine laugh escaping my lips, a short, sharp sound completely devoid of humor. You lived in my $600 million estate rent-free for 4 years. I paid the exorbitant property taxes, I paid the insurance, I paid for the landscaping that makes this lawn look so pristine. I never once asked you for a single dollar, we were protecting the estate. Chloe cried out, her voice shrill and desperate. We were protecting it from you. You're losing your mind, Evelyn. You're unstable. I am 34 years old and I am a federal forensic auditor, I stated, the sheer weight of the professional title crushing her accusation instantly. I freeze the assets of international cartels and dismantle corporate frauds. I am sharper than anyone at this table. I am not the confused one in this room. The revelation of my profession rippled through the crowd. The dynamic in the room inverted entirely. I was longer the fragile spinster. I was the federal predator they had mistakenly invited into the chicken coop. And since we are discussing fraud, I added, turning back to Julian, whose face had gone completely bloodless. I pulled the second document from my clutch and dropped it onto the table. This is a heavily redacted summary of the 3 high-interest loans you procured from an offshore syndicate in the Cayman Islands over the last 18 months. Loans for which you fraudulently pledged the Ashford estate as collateral using forged trust documents. Julian physically stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a chair. The color drained from the governor's face as the word fraudulent and offshore syndicate registered. He immediately signaled his security detail, recognizing the political toxicity of remaining at this table a second longer. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division received the unredacted files this morning, I informed Julian quietly. Your personal accounts have already been frozen pending federal review. You can't, Julian stammered, his bravado entirely shattered. He was a hollow man collapsing inward. Evelyn, please, they'll kill me, the syndicate. That sounds like a profound logistical problem for you, Julian, I replied, my voice devoid of even a microscopic ounce of pity. I produced the final document, the 30-day notice to quit, printed on Marcus's heavy, intimidating letterhead. I held it out. Julian didn't move, he was paralyzed by the totality of his destruction. Victoria stepped forward smoothly, taking the notice from my hand and placing it directly into Julian's trembling fingers. This is a lawful 30-day notice to vacate the premises, Mr. Vance, Victoria said, her tone almost conversational. You and your family have 30 days to remove yourselves and your belongings from the Ashford estate. There is also the matter of the event invoice, Victoria added seamlessly, producing a second sheet from her clipboard. Since you booked the Vanguard Charity Gala under your personal LLC and failed to secure the property owner's liability release, the full cost of the catering, staffing, and event management falls entirely on you. The total is $245,000. Payable immediately upon the conclusion of the event. $245,000, 30 days to eviction, a federal tax fraud investigation. Numbers that do not care about theatrical tiers or social status. The play was over, the script had been burned to ashes, and I was the one holding the match. The silence in the marquee was no longer expectant or pressurized, it was the absolute, vacuum-sealed silence of a bomb crater immediately following detonation. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, the only sound was the distant rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic waves against the seawall of my estate. I picked up my evening clutch, I did not gather the documents, I left the certified deed, the notice to quit and the federal fraud summary scattered across the pristine white tablecloth. I left them there for anyone to read, to photograph, to digest. I had no need to hide the truth anymore. I looked at Beatrice, the theatrical sorrow had been entirely burned away, leaving nothing but a hollow, terrified shell. She was staring at me as if I had suddenly metamorphosed into a monster. In a way, I had become the very thing they had trained me to be through decades of neglect and exploitation: cold, untouchable, and utterly self-sufficient. "You planned this," Beatrice whispered, her voice barely carrying over the table. "You knew they were going to freeze his accounts. You set him up to be destroyed." "I did not force Julian to commit federal tax fraud, Mother," I replied smoothly, adjusting the strap of my clutch. "I did not force him to forge trust documents, nor did I compel him to publicly declare me mentally unstable in front of the governor. I simply allowed him to proceed with his own horrific choices, and then I applied the consequences. There is a profound difference between a setup and a reckoning." "Evelyn, please," Julian finally managed to choke out. His knees seemed to give way slightly, and he braced himself against the back of his chair. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic, weeping desperation of a man who had finally hit the concrete at terminal velocity. "I'm your brother, you can't just walk away and let the federal government destroy me. I'll lose everything, the syndicate. You don't understand what they do to people who default." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice dropping into a terrifying register. "I track syndicates for a living, I know exactly what they do. Perhaps you should have considered that before you used my home as collateral for your incompetence." I did not feel a single twinge of guilt. I did not feel the familiar, sickening pull of familial obligation that had anchored me for 34 years. The tether was cut, I was free, floating in the icy stratosphere of my own agency, and the air was magnificent. I turned away from my family and addressed the 200 guests who were still frozen in their seats. "The Vanguard Charity Gala is fully paid for," I announced, projecting my voice clearly. "Sterling and Company has been instructed to serve every course, pour every bottle of vintage wine, and ensure that the orchestral quartet plays until midnight. Please enjoy the caviar, the estate is beautiful this time of year, do not let my brother's financial collapse ruin a perfectly good evening." I turned back to Victoria, we shared a brief, imperceptible nod. She had executed her role flawlessly. She was the operational hammer that had shattered Julian's glass house. "I leave the evening in your capable hands, Victoria," I said. "It will be impeccable, Ms. Vance," Victoria replied, slipping the clipboard under her arm. I did not wait for the governor's security detail to officially escort him out, though I saw them moving swiftly toward the exit. I did not wait for Chloe to start packing her designer luggage. I turned on my heel and walked down the center aisle of the Grand Marquis. The crowd parted for me. They moved back in their chairs, pulling their elbows in, watching me with a mixture of awe and genuine terror. I was no longer the tragic, fragile sister. I was the architect of my own empire, a woman who wielded federal law and immense wealth with the casual precision of a surgeon. I walked out of the tent and onto the sprawling lawn. The overcast sky had finally broken, and a light, misty rain was beginning to fall over the Atlantic. The cool air felt incredible against my skin. It felt like baptism. I did not look back. Not once. When you look back, you give toxic people the illusion that they still hold some gravitational pull over your emotional state. You give them the false hope that forgiveness is negotiable. It was not negotiable. There was no apology Julian could offer that would rebuild the bridge he had so arrogantly detonated. My town car was waiting in the circular driveway, the engine purring softly. The driver opened the door as I approached. I slid into the rich leather interior, the quiet luxury enveloping me. As the car rolled down the long oak-lined driveway and passed through the massive wrought iron gates, I pulled out my encrypted phone and sent a single secure message to Marcus in New York. "The notice is served, the assets are locked, the trap is sprung, enjoy your weekend." The fallout was both immediate and catastrophic for Julian. The speed at which his meticulously constructed facade imploded was almost terrifying to observe from a distance, though I watched it with the detached clinical interest of a forensic scientist analyzing a predictable chemical reaction. He did not even attempt to fight the 30-day eviction notice. With his personal bank accounts frozen by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the specter of a federal indictment hanging over his head, Julian had absolutely zero capital with which to mount a legal defense. He was financially paralyzed. They vacated the Ashford estate 22 days later. I heard through Marcus, who was monitoring the situation with his usual predatory amusement, that they had hurriedly rented a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable suburb. The social consequences were equally brutal. High society is notoriously unforgiving to those who expose them to scandal, especially scandal involving federal fraud and public humiliation. Chloe, possessing the survival instincts of a mercenary, filed for divorce 3 days after the Vanguard charity gala. She successfully argued in court that she had absolutely no knowledge of Julian's offshore syndicate dealings, a lie of omission that the judge surprisingly accepted. She took whatever minuscule assets remained unfrozen and immediately relocated to the West Coast, seeking a new ecosystem of wealth to attach herself to. The Vance family official 41-member chat was permanently deleted. The aunts, cousins, and in-laws who had so eagerly anticipated my public destruction suddenly developed a collective, profound amnesia regarding the entire event. My mother Beatrice attempted to contact me precisely 4 times in the ensuing months. The first call was a frantic weeping demand that I use my federal connections to save Julian from prison. The second call, realizing that strategy was futile, was an attempt to emotionally blackmail me regarding the sanctity of family. The third call was a demand for her fair share of the Ashford estate, operating under the deeply psychotic delusion that simply being my mother entitled her to a percentage of my real estate portfolio. The fourth call I answered. I did not speak long. I simply told her that the federal government was expanding its audit to include any individuals who had materially benefited from Julian's fraudulent Cayman Island loans. The line went dead immediately. I have not heard from her since. I find that I sleep incredibly well. Julian ultimately faced severe federal charges. The syndicate loans, combined with the forged trust documents, resulted in a multi-count indictment for wire fraud and tax evasion. He is currently navigating a complex plea deal that will likely involve substantial prison time and the complete liquidation of any future earnings he might somehow manage to generate. He is a ghost in the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. I do not feel pity, I do not feel regret, I feel the cold, satisfying symmetry of a balanced ledger. The Ashford estate remains in my possession, safely locked within the impenetrable walls of the trust Marcus established. I did not return to live there immediately. Instead, I hired Victoria and Sterling and Company to manage the property as an elite, ultra-exclusive corporate retreat center. It now generates a staggering 8-figure annual revenue, hosting summits for international tech CEOs and closed-door diplomatic meetings. The very property Julian tried to steal to save himself from bankruptcy has now become a self-sustaining economic engine, expanding my empire even further. I still live in my minimalist Manhattan penthouse. I still drive my unbranded hybrid sedan. I still work as a federal forensic auditor, tracking down the invisible money that corrupt men try to hide in the shadows. I am still quiet. I still prefer anonymity to visibility, but my silence is no longer a trauma response. It is a tactical choice. It is the silence of a predator who knows exactly where the trap is set. If there is one profound, uncompromising lesson I can impart to you from this entire experience, it is this: kindness without strict, heavily enforced boundaries is not love. It is merely a door you have forgotten to lock, inviting toxic people to pillage your resources. When you are the quiet, capable one in a toxic family system, they will inevitably mistake your patience for weakness. They will look at your generosity and see an endless, exploitable commodity. They will demand your labor, commandeer your assets, and rewrite reality to cast you as the fragile, confused victim, all while convincing themselves that they are doing you a favor. Do not scream. Do not beg them to see your worth. Do not engage in hysterical arguments trying to prove your sanity to people who are heavily invested in your perceived instability. Instead, go quiet, go incredibly terrifyingly quiet, gather your resources, build your empire in the shadow, away from their greedy, intrusive eyes. Secure your financial independence with the ruthlessness of a military operation. Learn the laws, hire the best legal counsel, and structure your life so that you hold the absolute, undeniable leverage. And when they finally push too far, when they attempt that grand, arrogant overreach because they are so intoxicated by their own delusions that they forget who actually holds the power, do not warn them. Do not threaten them. Simply step back, let them walk directly into the center of the trap they built for themselves, and calmly hand them the invoice for their own destruction. Just because you are silent does not mean you are not preparing. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do is simply smile, nod, and let them believe they have won. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found power in this narrative, if you have ever had to walk away from a family that demanded everything and offered nothing but humiliation in return, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own quiet strength. Let me know in the comments, what was the final straw that made you realize your silence was a weapon, not a weakness? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay strong, stay quiet, and always secure the deed.